UK just bombed Syria, and they said, quote, "We just carried out a precision strike that destroyed a vehicle and killed the individual inside." And you need to know who the UK just bombed in Syria. But first, you need to know that this comes as part of Operation Shader, and if you don't know what that is, it's the UK trying to defeat ISIS in Syria. The UK said, quote, "We identified a known terrorist entering a vehicle during an intelligence patrol." So here first, the UK actually admitted they were gathering intelligence over Syria to do this. But after that, they said, quote, "After tracking the target and confirming that no civilians were at risk, the aircraft carried out a precision strike that destroyed the vehicle and killed the individual inside." Now, the UK did not say who this individual was, which means it could have been a low-level official or it could have been a high-level official. But something important to know, it's very unlikely the UK would have carried out a strike like this if it wasn't on somebody quite important. And as this strike was only on a single vehicle, it would also suggest that is true as well. And another reason why this might be a high-level official is because the UK actually hasn't bombed Syria in quite a while. This is a new thing and a rare thing. So this is really worth knowing about. The UK has bombed Syria, and it could have killed somebody really quite important in ISIS. But on the topic of Syria, you also need to know that for the first time in 80 years, the Syrian president is about to visit the White House in the US. But you need to know, this same president is a former leader of Al-Qaeda, and the US went to war with him, and they tried to kill him. So this is a bit of a turnaround, but Syria said, quote, "This is the opening of a new chapter between the United States and Syria." It's worth knowing that after this current Syrian president actually overthrew the previous Syrian president earlier this year, yes, he did that as well as being a former leader of Al-Qaeda, he met with the US President Trump in Saudi Arabia. And despite this leader being a former leader of Al-Qaeda who the US was trying to kill, Trump actually seemed to quite like him. Something important though, this is the first time a Syrian president has ever visited the White House, at least for the first time in 80 years. So it's kind of ironic how they're inviting this former Al-Qaeda leader into the White House now, trying to be best friends with him, when previously they were trying to kill him. Regardless of that though, the meeting is happening. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it's probably going to be quite soon. Staying in the Middle East though, you need to know Israel has just been embarrassed like really nothing we've ever seen before. Today a video was leaked of Israeli soldiers beating up Palestinian prisoners in Israel. And it gets worse, but Netanyahu said, quote, "This is perhaps the most severe public relations attack that Israel has ever experienced since its establishment." And because this was such a big embarrassment to Israel and it made them look that bad, Israel has arrested the military lawyer who actually leaked this footage. And you need to know, rather than Israel publicly arresting these soldiers who were in the video beating up the Palestinian prisoners, Israel is more focused on throwing this lawyer in prison for exposing it to the world. Again, Netanyahu said, quote, "This incident has caused immense damage to the image of the state of Israel and the IDF." Now, I will say, shortly after this video was released, 5 Israeli soldiers were arrested for, quote, "serious bodily harm." Except we don't know if these soldiers were actually related to the video, because their names weren't released, so we don't know if they were the ones in the video or if it was something else. So other than Israel trying to throw this person in prison for exposing what Israeli soldiers have been doing, Israel isn't doing much. All we know is what the footage says, and that's that Palestinian prisoners have been attacked in Israeli prisons. But something a little bit more positive in the Middle East, Iran just unveiled a massive gas project. It's going to make them billions and billions of dollars every year. And you actually need to know what the Iranian president just did and how this is going to get Iran around the Western sanctions. Today, the Iranian president actually signed a law which means that now Iran will capture the lost gas that comes out of the ground when Iran is drilling for their oil. Currently, when Iran is drilling for their oil under the ground, gas obviously comes out of the ground, but they don't have any ways of capturing that gas. And because of that, they just set it on fire. But today, that's about to change, and now they're going to start capturing that gas, and you need to know what this is going to do for Iran. Iran said that capturing this wasted gas is not only going to make them $500 million extra a year, but it will also be used to power millions of homes in Iran, as well as building materials which Iran previously wouldn't have been able to get due to the Western sanctions. Now, it's worth knowing this isn't a new idea. A lot of countries already do this, but due to the Western sanctions, Iran hasn't been able to afford the technology to capture the gas. So as Iran slowly makes more money, they're slowly able to catch up. But this is a really big thing for Iran, and it's probably going to help them out quite a bit. Although Iran isn't in the best of positions, Iran today said, quote, "We only have 2 weeks left of drinking water available, and you need to know what's caused this." This week, Iran said, quote, "Iran is experiencing our worst drought in decades, unprecedented for over a century. And because of this, Iran has almost no water left. In fact, the water storages in Tehran are just 8% full now, according to Iran, and they're dropping fast. So if Iran doesn't get rain within the next 2 weeks, then possibly 10 million people living in the capital city will be without drinking water." The Iranian president said, quote, "This water crisis is more serious than what is currently being discussed." Now, there is actually multiple reasons why Iran is in a drought at the moment. Obviously, one of those is Iran just hasn't had any rain. But there are other reasons as well. For example, the rivers that flow into Iran have been blocked further upstream in Pakistan, India, etc., because those countries have built dams across the water to try and capture that water's energy. But at least at the moment, Iran is running out of water, and if they don't get rain within the next few weeks, things could really get a lot worse. But I also mentioned China, and you need to know that China just phoned the US, and you need to know what they said on that phone call. Last night, the Chinese defense minister phoned Pete Hegseth, the US defense minister, and they actually agreed on something really quite important. And to be fair, what they've just agreed on is actually going to change the future of China-US relations, and it could stop wars going into the future. Because of this phone call, China and the US just agreed to open something called military-to-military communication channels. And the reason for this is so that the Chinese military and the US military can directly speak to each other. And you need to know why they did that. At the moment, if the US military does something close to China, the Chinese military doesn't know what they're doing because they're not speaking to each other. So it could be classed as something far bigger than it actually is. For example, the US could just be moving an aircraft carrier. China could see that as... For example, the US could be just moving an aircraft carrier, but China could see that as an act of war. But today, they've started these military-to-military communications channels, meaning that if the US ever wants to do something like that in the future, they can just tell China, and then China won't be worried. And this really gets rid of the risk of a lot of misunderstanding, and it could stop a lot of wars. If anything comes up in the future, they can just talk about it now, rather than threatening each other. And this also does show, though, that the US is far more interested in working with China now, because previously they wouldn't have done that. For the last 5 years or so, the US has had no communication with China. So hopefully a lot's about to happen in a positive way. Although a few hours after that, China separately said, quote, "America is completely lying, and this will only end badly." And that's because today the US accused China of testing their nuclear weapons, and the US is using it as a reason to test their own nuclear weapons. The US President Trump said, quote, "Russia is testing, China's testing, everyone's testing, and we don't want to be the only country that doesn't test nuclear weapons now." But China responded to that, and they categorically denied it. They said, quote, "China is a responsible nuclear weapon state, and we have a self-defense focused nuclear strategy only." But despite China completely denying this and saying that they have not tested a nuclear weapon, the US didn't care. They doubled down. In fact, the US President Trump said, well, if China's not testing them above the ground, they must be testing them under the ground, which is why the US can't detect them. So in other words, the US has no proof that China's tested nuclear weapons, they're just saying they have, and the US is using it as a reason to test their own ones now. And to be fair, if the US does start testing nuclear weapons, it's very likely that other countries will start as well, probably including China. But this was my daily news recap. I do these every single day, and I cover the news of the last 24 hours, which probably you haven't heard about. So if you learned something, leave a subscribe and come back tomorrow, because I do one of these, as I said, every day. Sadly though, these videos are completely demonetized, so if you want to support the channel for $3 a month, you can go to alexbarnacote.com or click the top link in the description, and it really helps out and it means I can keep making these videos. So if you learned something, subscribe, but I bet you didn't know that China just tried to shoot down a fighter jet, and you need to know how it backfired.